Church, I have a question for you, and you're welcome to turn to your neighbor and tell them the answer to this question. Who goes first? Who goes first? So when you gather with your family, and as you recall memories of sitting down and eating supper as a young child with your siblings, who went first? Who goes first now when you gather with friends and it gets to the point where you're ready to eat, and so everyone kind of gets in line? Who goes first? I will confess that this past weekend I found out something about myself. The Leadership Council went away Friday night until Saturday at around 4 o'clock for deep prayer and discernment and visioning. It was an incredible God time. But I was in high gear on Friday, trying to get everything ready, and I was just coming off of being symptomatic with the flu, and so, it was just one of those days. And I'm not sure if I ate breakfast. I just simply don't remember. And then I started packing things, and lunch kind of came and went, and I'm thinking I probably didn't eat lunch. But I really wasn't hungry, so it didn't bother me so much. So we were waiting for folks to arrive Friday night, and I was going to make this wonderfully homemade meal for everyone, and instead we decided to get giant fried chicken. And so the fried chicken was there, and it was on the counter, and it was wafting. And I was smelling fried chicken. And so we were waiting for that last person to arrive, and I kept thinking, soon we're going to eat. Soon we're going to eat. I'm so hungry. And so we said grace, and as typical in our culture, the question arose from one of the group, well, who goes first? And I said, I will, because I'm so hungry. When you've gone a week with the flu and you don't feel like eating, when you come off of it, you get hungry. It's a good thing that cookie wasn't up here, because I want a cookie. Who goes first? Who goes first when you go to a concert? And the typical concert or the big events, they funnel, and so you have this, 5 lines, but you have 2 doors. And so those 5 lines kind of have to funnel. Are you the one who stands very close in line so that no one else gets in, and the line goes, your line goes? Or are you the one who just says, oh, go ahead and go, and then you look down because of all the other looks you're going to get because you've opened up your line for others? Who goes first when you're getting on 81 and you have just worked hard to merge onto 81, and traffic is horrific, and you come up to another on-ramp and there's a whole line of cars that are just aching to get on, and there you are, and you don't want to get in the other lane, and quite honestly, you're thinking to yourself, buddy, you take your turn, because I'm here, and I'm going first. And so today I'd like you to begin to think, who goes first in your life, in your thoughts and your attitudes and your behaviors and in your actions? Who typically goes first? There's a story out of World War II about a platoon of American soldiers that were stranded on one side of a minefield, and they had to cross the minefield. The commander came up with a plan. One man was going to walk across the minefield, leaving clear footprints behind him for the rest of the platoon to follow. Now, if the first man hit a minefield, then another man would walk in those footsteps until finally someone could get across without being killed, and others would follow. With their hearts in their throats, the young soldiers agreed to this plan. But the question was, right, who goes first? And when that question was asked, the commander picked up his rifle and began walking across the field. As their leader, he insisted, on risking his life for the sake of his men. And the commander was able to cross that field safely, and then following closely in his footsteps, all the other soldiers made it across the field. You see, sometimes going first is self-serving, isn't it? We decide, I go first because it benefits me. But there are other times when going first is sacrificial. It's risky. Now, most of us have been raised with an understanding of being polite, right? We have polite-isms. How many of you, just by a raise of hands, were raised that when your mom and dad were having company, you heard the polite-ism? We have company. Do not take the biggest piece of meat. Only one of you? I know better. How many of you were raised with a polite-ism when we have company? Do not take the last scoop of mashed potatoes. Yes. Yeah. See, we were raised with that kind of understanding. There were two boys that their grandpa lovingly gave them each a box of chocolates. And the one little boy took that box of chocolates and he ran to his room and he opened that box of chocolates and he just started eating all that chocolate till his face was just one chocolatey mess. The other little boy did something very different. The other little boy opened up his box of chocolates right in front of his grandpa. And then he looked at all those chocolates, and he looked at all those chocolates and which one were nuts and which ones were cream and which one were fruit. And you could just see his eyes were just enjoying those chocolates. And then he lifted the box of chocolates to his grandpa. And he said, Grandpa, thank you so much for this box of chocolate. But would you take the first piece? Who goes first? I have permission today to share a story out of my children's past. I'll try not to name names, but I only have two. And you know me, and you know a little bit about them. And so growing up in our house, it was a delight for my children when I would greet them after school with a pan of homemade, warm, delicious brownies. We all loved our brownies, but especially my children, we just loved to get that warm pan of brownies. Now, one of my children, who, thank goodness, isn't here today, and I will not name, could not get enough of eating brownies. And so that pan would come out, and I'd cut the pan, and we'd let it cool a little bit, and then it would be one brownie, and then another brownie, and another brownie, and another brownie, until pretty much the pan was gone. My other child had a different mindset. She would like to choose when she was going to enjoy her brownie. And so sometimes when I put the pan of brownies out, she wasn't especially hungry for her brownie. And so she would want to wait until she was like, yeah, now I'm ready for my brownie. I just had supper. I'm ready for some chocolate. I'm ready for my brownie. Except that when she would go to get her brownie, the pan would be empty. And she would get so angry and so frustrated that whenever she wanted a brownie, that brownie usually wasn't there. And so unbeknownst to me, I didn't know this, she decided one time to take her great big old chunk of brownie and she put it on a little plate and she put it way high in our kitchen cabinet behind some dishes that we never got to. Now, 2 weeks later, I was up in the cabinet trying to find something that I couldn't find, and out came this plate with a dried, nasty-looking brownie. And so I sent for my two children, and I said, "What is this?" At which point, one of my children had a sheepish grin on her face, and she said, "Oh, Mom, that's my brownie." And I said, "Well, why is it up there?" And she said, "Well, whenever I want a brownie, it's never there. So I decided that maybe if I hid it, then I would have it for when I wanted it. She was so careful to protect her brownie that she lost her brownie. You see, sometimes we're so careful to protect our brownie, to be first, and we end up losing what it is that we wanted so much to protect. So, being a good mom, as I know any of you moms would have done, this was a teachable moment. And I used it as a teachable moment. In fact, to this day, she will teach this to her daughter. And I said, you must always remember that an attitude and a lifestyle of sharing and generosity will always yield you more brownies. If you're generous with the brownies that are put before you, I promise you that when you want a brownie, I'll make sure that you have brownies. Well, Paul had a similar lesson to the church in Corinth. They were in a struggle. And if you understand the context of where this Corinth church was coming from, is they were under obligation by heritage and their background that they were supposed to give. And so their experience was a temple tax. It was sacrifice. It was that in order for them to receive something, they understood that they had to pay, they had to give something, and that system had been perverted. It's not how God had intended it. You see, God created us for community, for relationship, for sharing. That's how God literally created humankind. And then Abraham commenced that practice and said out to the people that you'll take a portion of what it is that God has blessed you with, and you'll share that among the people. And then Jacob continued it, Moses commanded it, and Jesus commended it, and Paul here with the church of Corinth, he concludes it. Except that this church was now set free. They were followers of Jesus, so no longer were they bound to this temple tax. It would be as though I would tell you this morning, I just heard we no longer have to pay tax. Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, think of the percentage of your income that you no longer have to give to the government. And we would all say, that's great news. And for a while, we would probably say, I'm not doing, it's mine. Until probably you'd go out and you'd get in your car and you'd go out in your local road and there'd be a great big old pothole and you'd have to deal with a pothole every single day. Or maybe your house would have a fire and there'd be no one to come and help you put that fire out to your home. And then we'd understand that, wow, so the understanding is this sharing. And so Paul tells this church, this isn't about money, folks. It has money in it, but it's not about money. What Paul is saying is, your sharing is not an obligation. What he says is, your sharing is the fruit of a loving relationship with a living God. Your attitude, who goes first, is fruit of a relationship that you have with God. And so Paul says, it's not the burden of sharing, it's the blessing of sharing. Now, he kind of unpacks this in verse 2 and verse 3. Because what he says to this church is, you know what, you're not under any obligation. But what I want you to consider is in this relationship, each week, I want you to take a portion, and he says, the first day of the week, I want you to set it aside. And he's really not saying the first day. It doesn't have anything to do with the first day. What Paul is saying is, I want you to get in the habit of a spirit of generosity. How are you going to cut the cookie? Who are you going to open the door for? Who's first in your life? And if every week you practice that portion of saying, Lord, I'm so blessed, and so I'm going to get in the habit of doing that. And then Paul says the second thing is it has to be personal. It has to be personal. John Rockefeller says this. He says that he has tithed every dollar that God had entrusted to him. But this is a remarkable thing he said. He said, if I didn't tithe the first dollar that I made, I never would have tithed the first $1 million that I made. I can remember as a child, my mom and dad giving me a quarter. And I would put it in this little envelope. And then the ushers would come around and I would drop it in the plate. I had no clue what I was doing. But it was repetitive. And I was able then to grow and understand and deepen my awareness of why am I doing this? It's not my money. I didn't have a job. But there was a habit of an understanding of a portion was going back. Now, I'll confess that when people talk to me about this portion, I will tell them as we have this conversation that I give a portion of what I earn. And as a leader, I believe that it's really important that I tithe, that I give 10% or more back. But I need you to hear what Paul is saying. Paul does not say to the church in Corinth, look, I want you to give a portion of what you earn. This is what he says. He says, you give a portion of how you've been blessed. You give a portion of how you've been blessed. So, for 26 years, I didn't work. I was in pain. And then God saw fit to do an incredible healing on my body. Give a portion to how I'm blessed. 8 months ago, my life was virtually over as I knew it to be. And God, in his abundant mercy, restored the use of my right side and gave me the right use of my mind. Jan, give a portion to how you've been blessed. God, just take it all. Take it all, because let's talk about blessing. Start to count the many blessings in your life. And Paul says, community, I want you to live out of who goes first. You think about your blessings. And then you act and you speak and you take time and you put someone else first. Boy, does that change things. How much that changes things. He unpacks that in 2 Corinthians, and he says, you know, if you're going to sow seed and you're going to just sow a little bit of seed, then what are you going to get? You're going to get a little seed. But if you sow generously and you sow that seed, what you're going to get back is an abundance of seed. Paraphrased, you'll never run out of brownies. You have an incredible, gracious, and loving God. But God is asking me, and God is asking you, who goes first? So when you come up against someone whose life is a mess, and they really need to talk, but you've got a day that's just planned to the wire, and you're not in the spiritual place, nor the emotional place, nor the physical place to take some time, who goes first? I rewatched Schindler's List not too long ago. I remember watching that movie for the first time. And when I got to the end of the movie, I thought for sure this was a happy ever after movie. I mean, the world had come, and the World War II was over, and the Allies had come, and so the Jewish people were finally able to go free. But that's not how that movie ended, if you recall. Oskar Schindler, who was an industrialist, but who had answered the question in his heart and his spirit, who goes first, began to use his money, and he began to buy Jews. And he would employ Jews in his factory that was making ammunition for Germany. And while he was buying Jews and asking them to work in the factory, he was also allowing them to create problems with the ammunition so it would not be effective. And so when the Germans surrendered, Schindler met with his workers and declared at midnight that they were all free to go. And the most emotional scene for me of the film is when Schindler said goodbye to his financial manager, his good and trusted friend, who was a Jew. And Schindler hugged him, and then he began to sob. The best part, and Schindler breaks down with uncontrollable sobs, and he looks at this trusted friend, and he says, I could have done more. I could have done more. And he looks at his automobile that he's going to get into, and that he's going to drive home. And he says, that car, I could have bought 10 more Jewish lives. I could have saved 10 more Jewish lives. And then he picks up something off the desk. I don't even remember what it was. And he says, this, I could have saved one more Jewish life. Why didn't I do more? One day, friends, Jesus is going to split the eastern sky, and he's going to come for his own. And it's not going to matter why it was so important that we went first. It's not going to matter. It's not going to matter how many vacations we go on. It's not going to matter that we got there first. It's not going to matter that we have a 401k. It's just not going to matter. The only thing that's going to matter is Jesus, I think, may ask us, Jan, who went first? Who went first? And I hope and I pray that somehow I could stand before God and you could stand before God and you could say, Lord, as much as it was possibly able, someone else went first. Because we have a community that's in deep need. We have a community that doesn't know Christ, and they need your time, and they need your heart. They need your brokenness. They need your story. They need God's story. They need your resources. They need you to put them first. So I'm going to ask this morning that you would join me this week in a radical event. I'm asking that you would join me in a generosity experiment. I am asking, as Aaron asked the children, if you would find some place to set aside a portion of who you are and that you would make someone else first. An example of this is that my husband goes to Sheetz probably daily. I know this when I look at the back seat of his car. And I see soda, those great big Sheetz soda things, and coffee cups. And I'm like, you're drinking too much soda. Do you go to Sheetz every day? And then I count the number, and I'm like, you go to Sheetz every day. But what he tells me is that when he goes to Sheetz or when he goes to get gas, when he goes in and he sees a service personnel, when he sees a firefighter, when he sees a police officer, he manages to try to get in line before they do. And what he does is he'll say to the cash register, the person that's up there, he'll say their cup of coffee, and he'll slide them a 5 or a 10. It's on me. And then he'll leave before they ever get up to the line. So they don't know who's doing it. They have no clue. But their life is blessed because they walk out saying, somebody put me first. It might be that you go to Middlesex Diner or to Haas's or wherever you go on Sunday after church or any time during the week. and that you might see someone who's sitting by themselves, young or old, and you just signal your waitress or your waiter, and you say, could you do me a favor? I'd like to pay for their meal. I don't want them to know. So could you just get their ticket, and could you give it to me, and when they go to leave and they ask for their bill, would you just give them this? So they know that somebody said, today, you're first. And it doesn't necessarily need to be somebody in great need, although it would be awesome if it were. But what we're doing is we're saying this week, we're going to be intentional about understanding this habit of saying, I'm not first. No matter how little or how much I have, I want to live a life of not being first. Because what I know of my God is there's always going to be brownies, right? I mean, God says, as parents, who are we that we would love our children and they would ask for bread and we would give them a stone? We wouldn't do that. And God provides for us so abundantly. But he's asking us, would you live your life in proportion to your blessing? Who goes first? And then I would invite you to share the glorious ways in which you're blessed. You're blessed by putting someone else first. And so I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward, and as they come forward and they receive your blessings, not your obligations, but your blessings, that they would also have a stack of these cards and that they would give each one of you one of these cards. And then this week, we have a chance. I would estimate that we're probably about 210 in worship today between our two services, maybe more. That this week, 200 touches are going to go out in this community to tell someone, today, this moment, you're first. Will the ushers come forward?